Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
Isn't it fun when he comes in? Alfred University Political Science Professor Emeritus Dr. Robert Heineman.
Brian, thank you.
Congressman Tom Reed held a press conference yesterday.
Oh, good for him.
On the telephone, as he always does. I call them press calls. He calls them media calls. Jonathan said something about that once. Why isn't it called media calls? Actually, they are called media calls.
Yeah, you got a point to make here?
Yeah, I'm taking too long to get to it. Okay. I asked Congressman Reed what he thought of Adam Schiff.
Ooh.
The way Adam Schiff is handling things and the way that the microphone was cut off of Louisiana Republican Congressman Steve Scalise the other day when Scalise asked, have we had a vote on impeachment yet? And Reed's explaining here why the Democrats won't have an impeachment.
To have the impeachment process involve the minority party is something the majority party in the Democratic Speaker's office does not want to do. And by that, what I mean is impeachment inquiry vote would open up tools that would allow Republican members to subpoena evidence, bring in the kind of traditional fundamental fairness issues into light where you would have the ability to get to the facts and to, as a minority party, have the same level of investigative tools to present evidence on the theories that are being put out there as to the support or theories against going forward with impeachment.
I think what the Democrats are doing is very crafty, very cunning, and very nasty. And as Mr. Reed has pointed out, what they're doing is preventing the Republicans from having any kind of public say in the process at this point. So, and he's right. By preventing a vote on this or by delaying a vote on this, I think they feel they can avoid any kind of fairness or transparency. But what's happening here is, for example, in Schiff's committee, Intelligence Committee, I think only one Republican is allowed to sit in on the hearings. And on the other committees where they're holding hearings as well, the Republicans cannot speak. They cannot have a counsel. They cannot bring witnesses. So what's happening is here we're getting a process by leaking so that, for example, from Schiff's committee, we get leaks about negative things people have said about Trump and rumors that they've tossed out, and they're being released in a kind of a subterranean fashion, and the press, of course, is gobbling this all up. So the picture you're getting consistently here is that, in fact, there's a tremendous amount of evidence and reasons for impeaching Trump, when there's really nothing at all, as far as I can tell. But the chance to actually offset that, provide counter, it's just being swept aside by the abrogation of the rules, basically, by the Democrats. I mean, this is really quite amazing. And so the press is just sort of living off of these leaks and making the most of them. And it's really a very nasty move on the part of the Democrats. And I think it's not Biden that Pelosi's so concerned about. I think she's really concerned about quite a number of Democrats in the House of Representatives who are first-term Democrats.
AOC.
And some of the others are going to have to go out there, well, not that so much, but are going to have to go out there and run for re-election. And she doesn't want to have them on record as supporting an impeachment inquiry or either that or supporting impeachment itself. She's really trying desperately to avoid that. And so it's they're taking this kind of undercover approach, which I think is what the Constitution is all about and against. The whole idea is that in America we allow people to have their say, and you then come up with some sort of decision. I don't know what the Supreme Court would say about this. Typically, the courts have allowed the House and Senate to establish their own rules. And so I don't know. Can members of the House go ahead and rip up the Republicans like they are, or was just going to run into some serious legal problems down the line. But it's pretty crafty on the part of the Democrats here.
Dr. Heineman, if I could bring up Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC as they call her, again.
Yes.
She endorsed Senator Bernie Sanders in the presidential race. What effect will that have?
Well, I think, also endorsed Sanders, did she not?
Are you talking about Omar?
Yeah, I think, yeah. I believe she endorsed Sanders. I think they both endorsed Sanders. I think the hope here from Sanders' point of view is that it's going to staunch the bleeding there from his problems with his health, and maybe kind of establish, well, no, he's still a solid radical candidate here for us. Because otherwise, I do think his support is going to drift off to Biden and Warren. I don't see why it would stay with Bernie Sanders. So I think that may be part of the effort there to keep Sanders effective. And what they gain from that, I'm not sure, although it certainly does tend to split the Democrat vote here in the primaries.
A lot of, I shouldn't say a lot of. There are some voices on the left that want to get rid of the Electoral College because Hillary lost last time, I think is why. And also probably because it would give more power if you got rid of the Electoral College to New York State in national elections and California in national elections. Dr. Heineman,
yes, well,
what's going on with the Electoral College?
It's something we should be talking about. I think this is from an article, I believe, in the New York Times here in the last few days. It's something I think that the press generally is not giving much attention to, but it really is pretty important. And your point about the efforts, a concern about, well, for example, Al Gore carried a more popular vote than George Bush, and Hillary obviously carried more popular vote than Donald Trump. Now, I'm not certain whether either one of them carried a majority of the popular vote. I'm not certain, but they clearly carried more than the person who carried the Electoral College. And what's happened has been that in the state of Washington, in the last presidential election had 6 Democrat electors who did not support Hillary Clinton. I believe this is correct. I may be a little off on my numbers. I think 5 of them voted for Colin Powell, and I think 1 voted for a Native American. I don't know who she was. But then the state of Washington has fined each of these electors $1,000 for refusing to follow the popular majority in the state of Washington. And these electors, legitimately, I think, have taken the case to court, and it's working its way through the courts. And the real issue here is, and this is where I think it could well end up in the Supreme Court, is can the states require electors to follow the popular majority in the state? Or put another way, and a little differently, can the states tell the electors how they have to cast their vote? And that gets into the situation that you're suggesting, that some states, for example, provide that the electors have to go with whoever carries the popular vote. So that in the last election, for example, Hillary carried the popular vote. So electors in states that did not vote for Hillary might well be then required to vote for her anyway. And that's the issue that's really beginning to get a lot of attention, because more and more states are going to that kind of law. And obviously the electors in Washington are opposed to that. And I think it's very clear that the Electoral College, as it was set up, was for individuals of light and leading to meet and cast their vote for president. And it was only after it had been in existence for some time that increasingly you got this, depending on how the majority in the state went. And so there have been quite, I think there's been as many as 150 electors over the years who have gone rogue. There was one down in Alabama who was always casting his vote for Bear Bryant, the football coach. And there are some that voted for example, George Wallace. And over the years, the Congress, and I guess the House of Representatives, has basically counted them as whoever they voted for. They have not tried to nullify their vote because they voted for whoever who wasn't on the ballot. So the House has been pretty consistent on this, and I think the Constitution is pretty clear in terms of who the writers and their intentions. It's only been recently, when you get more and more of the mostly the radical left trying desperately to find some way of weakening the Electoral College. And, of course, Hillary carried California because Trump simply just didn't bother to campaign there. And the same for Gore in 2000. Bush simply didn't bother to campaign in New York. And with the result, I think Gore carried New York by the largest popular vote any presidential candidate has. And Bush never campaigned in California either. He and Karl Rove had figured out they could carry the Electoral College without either California or New York State. Now, I think that's kind of a dicey thing for the Republicans to continually depend on, but that's kind of the way things have been going. And so from the Republican point of view, the Electoral College is really quite key. But I think historically, if we rogue electors that have a right to do that. And there are some cases going back in the 1950s or whatever where the Supreme Court has essentially said that. But what they would say today, I'm not quite sure. But obviously, some of these are ways of trying to get around the Electoral College allowing states to have a determinative say in election of a president. So it's something to keep an eye on, that's for sure.
Before if we could rewind to before the 2016 election when Trump was campaigning.
Right.
When Trump kept predicting that everything was going to be rigged against him and he was really going to win, but the outcome would be that Hillary had the victory, was Trump talking about things being rigged in the Electoral College or the popular vote? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't understand what Trump would have been talking about there.
He did say that a lot.
Yeah, and I don't know where he was coming from on that.
I think it was like a kind of a preemptive strike in case things went wrong.
Yeah. Well, election night, he told Melania, I'll say a few words and we'll go upstairs and go to bed because he thought he had lost. But that was not.
And he, I think, if I remember correctly, the kind of thing he'd say was, look at the crowds that I, Donald Trump, draw. Look at the crowds that Hillary Clinton, draws. Trump had much larger crowds, and the polls were all in favor of Hillary. And I think that's where he was coming from.
Yeah, could be. Could be saying that the polls are rigged, whatever. And in that sense, he was, as is often the case with Trump, he wasn't too far off. I don't think the polls, frankly, were rigged purposely, but they certainly were skewed in terms of trying to identify accurately what the electoral vote was going to be. That
Moody's came out this week predicting that President Trump is going to win. They said this on Tuesday. It will be a landslide, but they say turnout for Trump is the key.
Well, that's often the case. And we'll just have to see. I mean, there are a lot of things that can happen yet between now and next November. But again, it's amazing Trump he's made decisions and done things that he said he was going to do, and they seem to be moving along. And this latest thing with the Kurds, of course, as you know, the Kurds have reached some sort of agreement with Assad in Syria, so that they've got a bit of a coalition there. Now, how far you can trust Assad, I have no idea, but at least I think they have decided they'd better negotiate some kind of deal. And as our listeners undoubtedly know, Vladimir Putin and the Russians have decided they're going to move in there and occupy some of these bases. And I say to the Russians, go get them, guys. If you got the money and the material and such, and you want to start spending them in Syria, it's all yours.
Congressman Tom Reed talked about that, and what he said was on the issue of pulling out. He said this with Chris Cuomo on CNN on Wednesday night, and he said this on his press conference Thursday afternoon with all the other reporters. He said, Obama put the troops in Syria. He didn't go through Congress. There's a chance to pull these guys out. Go with it. And Reed also says all these people who are huffing and puffing about pulling the troops out of Syria won't demand a congressional vote on going to war.
Yeah. Well, a vote going to war, I think, is probably pushing it a little bit, but he's absolutely right. Obama got us in there because the Arab Spring was going to flower all over the Middle East. And it's Hillary, is quoted as saying, Assad has to go. Well, guess what, Hillary? Assad is still there. But the Turks have been a little more flexible with us in terms of, I think, yesterday suggesting a short ceasefire to allow the Kurds to move out of Turkey and into areas in Syria. I don't know how that goes. But what Erdogan wants from Turkey is he wants kind of a buffer zone there across northern Syria between Turkey and Syria and the Kurds. And I don't know, I think he's in a position to get that. But, if they want to fight it out between Syria and the Russians and the Turks, let them have at it. I don't think we need to be losing any American troops in that total swamp. So,
what do you make of what the president has said? And, I don't want to say he's put a positive spin on it. That's kind of a negative way to say it, I suppose, but he has. He said we're not losing American troops. No one is dying over there.
Right.
And it's being pointed out by Trump supporters and the conservative media that the Democrats are hawks all of a sudden.
Yeah, that I heard that as well. And because this gives them a chance, I guess, once again to criticize Trump for a decision, and all of a sudden, and now, the idea is, we have to get our troops in there. We can't. We've tied up with all these friends in quotes, and so we got to start putting American troops in danger again. They don't look good, and I can see where Moody's thinks that Trump could be going along at a pretty good pace at this time, and I think the Democrats can see that too, and I think they're desperately running about trying to find some way of getting some kind of coherence to their campaign, and I guess their suggestion is now being made that, well, maybe we ought to put an end to these debates. Well, it's up to you guys. Go ahead. I think the one thing we have to do here in this whole situation, I was talking to one of my friends who's pretty conservative as well today, and the one thing we have to do is avoid tearing into the not-so-liberals to any great extent. I think if we just kind of sit back and let them tear each other to pieces, it works out a lot better from the conservative point of view.
So Trump doesn't need to beat up on the Democrats.
Right. Let them, they're perfectly capable of ripping each other up, and that's their problem. They just don't have anybody in there that can bring them all together. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Trump made an interesting statement yesterday.
Oh, yeah?
He was asked by reporters, what do you think of what Senator Lindsey Graham saying about you making a mistake by pulling the U.S. troops out of Syria? And Trump said Lindsey Graham is only too happy to spend 20 years fighting.
Well, it's kind of a nasty thing to say about. I mean, I like Lindsey Graham, all right.
And he's been good to Trump lately.
Yeah, and he's certainly a well-meaning guy. I think Rand Paul's comments really were pretty vicious in terms of Lindsey Graham. I guess I'd just as soon have Lindsey Graham on my side as Rand Paul. But I think Paul's wrong on Graham's wrong on this, and that the problem with this is that we have all these international involvements here. We got American troops in danger in a lot of these areas, and that all drifts back to various interest groups within the Beltway, who are pouring money into campaigns, who are pouring money into the media, and painting this picture favorable one way or another. For example, the idea of the poor Kurds. The Kurds are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves, and as Trump says, they're not all that nice to begin with. They're just part of the general attitudes and tribalism and such that you have in the Middle East. And some of these guys are not pleasant guys at all. But be that as it may, if we can work together and push mutual interests, fine. But once it gets to the point where they're exploiting us in our funds and such over a long period of time, it's time for us to pull out. I think it shows up really most dramatically in Afghanistan, where the corruption of the Afghani government has been notorious for the last 15 or 20 years. And where are they getting that money? They're getting it from us. And the Taliban, I don't think the Taliban are pretty nasty people, but it's not clear to me at all that they're corrupt. There's zealots or ideologues, and that's one of the reasons why I think once we pull out of Afghanistan, the Afghani government had better be prepared to defend itself vigorously. And the problem there is the treatment of women. Where here the Afghani government may in fact be pretty corrupt, but they have been very generous, at least in Muslim terms, toward women in terms of educating them, allowing them to run for office and things of that sort. And that's going to be very nasty, I think, if the Taliban come back in and take over. So it's sad, but I don't know how long we can, 17, 18 years. Come on, guys. If you can't defend yourselves, we're moving on.
Doc, thank you so much for stopping by.
Well, I'd just like to mention to our folks that we have an event there at the main place tonight for the
yes, Chris Cartel,
family.
the Hornell firefighter who had a stroke.
Yes, and it would be great if people take a minute or two to stop by and give a little support. They're a great family.
Good thinking. Thanks for the reminder.